Welcome everybody from around the world. That's pretty impressive. I'm going to talk today about my experiences in going places to further research my family. I've been researching my family for many years, and I've had a lot of fun with it, and I like to share that fun. I'm going to share with you quite a few websites, and just want to tell you, you don't have to write anything down at this time. If you signed up through Eventbrite or through Friendship Force, you will be sent a link to a PDF of this from which you can click on all of the sites that I'm going to mention. So if this would help you, you don't need to write anything down today because I'm going to go pretty fast. I've got a lot of material. First, the question is, why travel? If you've done much research in genealogy, you know that most of it is done online. And this is talking about what do you do after you have exhausted those online resources and you just can't get any further. And sometimes you've also exhausted yourself. And what I'm going to tell you about is how to find more information by going to libraries that may have things that you can't get online, by going to where your family came from and how to prepare for that, and also even sometimes meeting distant relatives. So the first library that I'm going to talk about, and a lot of us on this are Californians, is the California State Library called the Sutro Library. It's on the campus of San Francisco State University in San Francisco. And it is an absolutely fabulous resource. If you're thinking, yes, but I don't have any roots here in California, well, neither do I. But let me share with you what I found on my family, none of which is West Coast. First, here's a picture of the library and a very modern facility and the address of it. It is, of course, with COVID, not open right now, but their website is open so you can start looking at their collections and determine what you want to see when they do open. I think they will be opening eventually. They have a beautiful reading room, and you can go there and use their resources, which are quite varied. This is an example of one thing they have. One of my family names is Roush. And so I looked in the library catalog, and behold, they have a book called The History of the Roush Family in America from its founding by John Adam Roush in 1736. And guess what? He's my fifth great grandfather. So they actually let me take that book home and use it for a few weeks and return it to them. And I got an enormous amount of information about it. So it's not just all California. They also, besides having shelves and shelves of books by family name, they have census records, they have military records, and they have records from every state and then subdivided by every county. So I just put in Allegheny County, and I got list after list of all the books they have for Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. So no matter where you're from in the United States, they also have some foreign records. My husband was German, and he actually found some records there of ancient German churches and things. So another library that one can go to, but not right now, is the Family History Library. This is maintained by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City. They too have a fabulous website. So if you will look on their website and see if they have resources that will be helpful in your search, go ahead and do that now online. And later you may be able to actually go to the library, as I have done. They also have another service. They have people who will help you. So if you see a book and you say, I really want page 400 of that book, they have people who will copy it and email it to you. So all kinds of services. Another great library that I have used is the Daughters of the American Revolution Library in Washington, D.C. It is a wonderful library, especially if you're interested in early American history, although they do have more recent things, and they do have a little bit of foreign things, but mostly it's on American history and American family names. You do not have to be a member of the DAR to use it. The last time I went, I think they suggested I make a $5 donation. Well worth it, and a beautiful reading room there. Also in Washington, D.C., the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress tries to get a copy of every book that is published in the United States. That's a lot of books. They also have some foreign collections. The Library of Congress is a little bit more troublesome to use. You have to have a library card, which means you have to apply for it. Of course, it's a federal building, so you have to go through security to get there. And they have such an enormous collection that when you go there, you find the book that you want and you write it down on a card, and somebody goes and gets it for you, because it may even be in another building somewhere in Washington, D.C. Their collection is too large for any one building, but they have things that you will not find anywhere else. So if you want to look there, make the effort to go and use it. I have used it quite a bit. All over this country, there are other libraries that provide services similar to the ones that I described at the Sutro Library. This is one for Independence, Missouri, which focuses on sort of Southern Midwest records. And there's a link for that. And here's another one for the Midwest that's in Fort Wayne, Indiana. But there are a lot of these. So don't rule out using the services of libraries that are not local to you. Most of them make their things online available. Many of them have even resources you can read directly online. I use the Virginia State Library. Most of my family is from Virginia. So I use the Virginia State Library quite a bit, and they have amazing resources that you can actually read online. So this is a long list. These are all clickable links. And so if your family, for instance, has roots in Detroit, I would recommend that you check out what they have and see what they have. So again, find a library that makes sense for the family you're researching, and see what they have, and see if it's worth your while to go there and use the library in person. Again, do your research before you do your traveling. Now, once you've done that, it's time to go a little bit further. Look at what you found and what U.S. counties or cities did your people live in? What other countries did they live in? What historical events might they be associated with? What did they experience? I'd recommend you start with the one closest in relation to you. Sometimes we don't think those are the most interesting, but they are the ones that you need to start with, because then you're accurate working your way back. A few useful resources to have notes on and think about before you start your trip. First, what local libraries are there? And I don't mean even just the links that I already gave you, but I mean truly, truly local libraries. The libraries in that small town where your parents were. You might be amazed with what they have. There are online records about cemeteries. There's something called the Find a Grave Index, where you can put in a name and a state, and they may be able to tell you where someone is buried, and maybe even some photos. That's a good way to find that cemetery. You might want to go to that cemetery and see who's buried right next to them. You might find something interesting. There are county historical associations. So if you know a county, see what they have. There's a site called US GenWeb, and I'll show you a page from that in a moment. but it has context for every county in the United States. Schools and businesses may also have been affiliated with your family, and even local directories may have information. And almost every state has some kind of a library that has a genealogical section that might be useful. So this is a page from US Gen Web, and it has on the front page, there are all the states, and then from when you click on the state, it will open up to a page of all the counties in that state. And ideally, each county will have an actual person that manages that county. And under that, we'll have links for things that are particular to the county. For instance, I found a county that had a list of all the military service that they knew about from people who were from that county. So everybody who served in World War II, everybody who served in World War I, everybody who served in the war between the states. So now I'm on the road. This is Upshur County, West Virginia, where my mother was born. What to say about this? I found the graves of my grandparents, and I had among my mother's things an old photograph of this obelisk tombstone that I knew to be my grandfather's, and I wanted to find it. So my husband and I went there, and driving around, we can't find the cemetery. Buchanan, West Virginia is a town, population about 6,000. I can't find the cemetery, so I stopped in to a service station, and while my husband waited in the car, I went in and asked the guy who worked there, where is the Heavener Cemetery? And he said, why you want to know? And I said, well, my grandparents are buried there. And he said, who's your grandfather? I said, well, my grandfather's name was Henry Gay. Oh, he says, really? Yeah. Well, he calls to his wife in the back. Hey, Edith, come out here. Hey, Edith, this here's Henry Gay's granddaughter. I'm looking and saying, it's getting a little weird here. Henry Gay died in 1944. This guy is my age. There is no way he remembers him. But he went on. He said, you know, Henry Gay was the mayor of this town. And I thought, well, yeah, I knew that, but why do you know that? But here's the thing. In small towns, you've heard it said that everybody knows everybody's business, and there's a lot of truth in that. It's also true that the corollary to that is everybody knows everybody's family, and people know their local history a lot better than people in big cities. I mean, does anybody know who was mayor of Sacramento in 1944? I sure don't. But in these small towns, you just might run into somebody who knows. So it's worth going there and just talking people up. The picture in the lower part of this is a picture of the modern day campus of West Virginia Wesleyan University, where my grandfather went to college. He graduated in 1908. So I went to the modern day college and went to the registrar's office and asked them if they had a yearbook for 1907, 1908. Well, they did. And look, there he is. Who knew? He was the class treasurer. So sometimes they do know. Here's a picture of the university when he was there and a picture of the town when he was there. They both changed a little bit. I also wanted to find the house where my mother grew up. I knew the address. So I went to the address, and today it is a McDonald's. The house doesn't exist anymore. So the moral to that story is go sooner rather than later, because buildings won't always be there. Local libraries can be really useful for finding things that are only of local interest. In the Tuscaloosa, Alabama library, I found a book that someone had put together on a typewriter, I guess, with little drawings of historic houses in Tuscaloosa County. And I found these 2 pages. The Robertson home, Robertson is my maiden name, and this is the house where, on the left, where several generations of my family actually lived. And I don't know who's living there now, but it is still occupied, so I wasn't able to go into that one. The other one is the John Sanders house. They're my 3rd great grandparents, and it gave really good directions on how to find it. So we went and found it. Behold, this is the house. It's abandoned today, but I think it was a very nice house in its day. And we even looked around the yard around it. But for a house that's 200 years old, it's not that bad. As you can see from the back of it, there's a reason why it's not occupied today. It looks like the chimney fell off. But sometimes you can find the old houses that might have been associated with your family. I went on to Pocahontas County, West Virginia. And there, I also was looking for a cemetery, and we arrived at the Mountain View Cemetery. Wasn't hard to find, but it was enormous and it was snowing. And I didn't really want to walk around the cemetery until I found the right grave. So I went to the local library and went in and asked the librarian, do you have an index for the cemetery? And she says to me with a very straight face, oh no, we don't have an index to the cemetery, but we have somebody who knows everything. And without laughing, I said, you know, I've always wanted to meet somebody who knows everything. Well, she called to her employee, and I was introduced to Pam, and I stated my request again, and Pam said, oh yeah, I know where that is. If you have a car, I'll show you there. So she left the library. She got in the car with us, who she didn't know from anything, but again, small town. And we drove out to the cemetery, and she walked right to it. This is the grave of Uriah Byrd and his wife. These are my grandparents. So, great grandparents. And so after I found this and I was thanking her, she said, now tell me how you're related to them. So I explained, and I could see her mind going tick, tick, tick. And she said, you and I are 3rd cousins. And later I went back and checked the records, and she was absolutely right. The woman at the library who knew everything was my 3rd cousin. Now, that might sound unlikely, like an unlikely happenstance, but again, it's a small town. And besides, this is West Virginia. You know, the joke they say about West Virginia is that the bumper stickers there say West Virginia, almost heaven, 500 mountains and 14 last names. It's kind of true. But anyway, another thing my mother remembered was that she couldn't tell me the address where her grandparents had their farm, but she said our next door neighbor was Pearl S. Buck. Well, that was a clue. So in the state historical markers index, well, behold, there is this sign that marks the birthplace of Pearl S. Buck, and that home today is open for tours. Well, from that, I was able to find the farm right next door and figure out which farm had been my great-grandparents. Mother remembers meeting Pearl Buck when Mom was younger. Also in the same town, after they left the farm, they bought a house in town, And that house is still standing, and that house is on the historic register. So historic registers of a county may be very useful, especially if your family was there quite some time ago. So we found this house. It's actually, it was vacant. So we kind of took ourselves a little tour while we were there. Another thing that I found, not in the same county, but a neighboring county, I knew I had other relatives buried. And I knew that it was on private land. So I just got to pretty close to there, rang somebody's doorbell and said, I'm looking for this cemetery. And the woman said, oh, that would be my neighbor, Zula. I'll call her. And Miss Taylor, who owns the property now, met us in her truck, drove us to the top of the hill. Again, it's on private land. It's in a cow pasture area. And she is still maintaining this. Now, she's not related to any of these people except that her former husband is buried in this cemetery, but she's maintaining it meticulously. I was impressed with the effort to which people will go to maintain cemeteries of people they don't even know. I had this old photo among my mother's possessions, but I didn't know much about it, where it was taken or who the people were. I suspected it's probably Pocahontas County. So I posted it on the Pocahontas County webpage of US Gen Web, which I mentioned before. And within days, I was contacted by the current owner of the property, who turned out to be another third cousin of mine with my mother's maiden name. This guy was Robert Gay. My mother was Mary Alice Gay. So they invited me to visit, which I eventually did, but I found this through US Gen Web by sharing a family photo. Also, in the local historical society, I found a big file of old photos, alphabetical, and I found my third great aunt and uncle. I'd never seen a picture of them. Another thing we can do is connect ourselves to historical events that had a connection to our family. Now, my great-great-grandfather was a Confederate physician, and we know from his military records that he was present at the surrender at Appomattox. Now, my grandson, Aiden, who lives about an hour from Appomattox now, he actually has 7 ancestors who were there. So for us, this family history is our history. So of course, I had to take Aiden to Appomattox and let him hear the park rangers tell the story of what happened there. And I could relate it to our own family, which I think he will remember. In the same vein, my 4th great-grandfather, Alexander Waddell, we know he was with George Washington when Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. So, of course, we had to go to Yorktown too and hear that story. Now, in all, I have 12 Revolutionary War direct ancestors. But my grandson, whose father is also long-term Virginia family, has a total of 47. So we have a lot of history to follow there. Not only your direct ancestors, but also some of your collateral kin. Like in this case, a cousin who is, well, let's just say my 8th great-grandfather is his 6th great-grandfather. So, but he was Richard Evelyn Byrd, who was, he explored the North and South Pole. And there is this statue to him in Arlington Cemetery, and also, of course, a gravestone. So it doesn't have to be direct ancestors for it to be meaningful history to your family. Now, while we're all stuck at home, I'm going to give you a few ideas of what you can do before we can really, any of us, start traveling very well. While I was doing more research on home, I learned that my 10th grade aunt, Ann Foster, and both of her daughters were accused of witchcraft in the Salem witch trials. That was a particularly dark chapter of American history, but an interesting one. So I thought, I can't go there right now. Well, it turns out they have a website, and you can go from bubble to bubble here, and it will open up and give you photos and history and a little narration of each of the sites that was associated with the Salem witch trials. Now, if you don't happen to have any witches, well, it turns out that there are sites like this for many, many historical locations. So if you want a virtual tour of Ellis Island or of the Angel Island Immigration Station, which was the way in for most of the Chinese immigrants that came here in the early part of the 20th century. There are military museums, there are battlefield tours for several Revolutionary War and war between the states. There's also some virtual field trips, virtual museums, and historic places. This one is interesting. Take a virtual tour of your ancestors' hometown. This is put together by the LDS Church, and it uses Google photos to walk you through your hometown. It's kind of cute. You can also use, most states have some kind of searchable website of their historic markers. So if there is a person or an event that you can find, this might be a good place to pin down that location. In this case, my 6th great grandfather, John Wilson, I knew he was a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses, which predated the American Congress. But he's buried on private land, which is really inaccessible. But at the highway to the closest point of that, there is this sign that at least tells you you're pretty close to the cemetery. And I thought that was as good as I could do. Here's the website for the Office of Historic Preservation if you have California roots. The city of the county of Sacramento has at least 45 historical markers. And if you widen that out to the entire state of California, you'll be busy for quite a while. Now we're going to talk about what to do when we go to another country. Now, my 5th great grandfather, John Adam Roush, remember I mentioned him before. I know he was a tanner. I know he was born in Darmstadt, Germany in 1711, and he died in Shenandoah County, Virginia. He had 13 children. His 9 sons served in the American Revolution, but I'm descended from one of the daughters. And after his death, the sons all got land grants in Ohio. So most of the Roushes today are in Ohio. But the daughters, who all took their married names, stayed in Virginia. And believe it or not, they ran his tannery after his death, which running a tannery is nasty work for women or anybody. But that's how the story goes. But his father was a Protestant minister in Meisenheim, Germany. So my husband was German. We had to go there. First, I started off in Shenandoah County, Virginia, and I found where John was buried, both his original marker and one that had been put up later by some of his descendants. So on the left, his original marker, it was entirely in German. So it gave the year he was gestorben. And to the right of it, it listed his descendants and gives a little bit better, neater gravesite. That was in Shenandoah County, Virginia. Following to where his father was the minister, this is a photo of the Schloss in Meisenheim, Germany, where my sixth great grandfather was minister between 1711 and 1714. So my husband and I went there for services on a Sunday morning. It is still an active congregation in the same building where he was the minister. This is what the inside looks like. Rather impressive. And it's a lovely little town. It didn't take any war damage, so it still has its original medieval walls. And as you walk around town, the buildings have the year that they were built on them, and very impressive, many of them from 1100 or so. I even found the house where they lived. And this is about the church. The church building was built after 1479. It's huge. Just for size, that is my husband down in the right corner. And so it's a huge building. But here's something that I would only know by going there. Now, my husband and I both worked for the Department of Agriculture, and we notice plants, and we notice farms, and we notice things like that. And what we noticed, that we're driving in this relatively flat area, and then we get to the rolling hills. As we're nearing Meisenheim, it's rolling hills, it's getting interesting, it's small farms, it's little cattle operations. And here's what I know about him. He arrived in Philadelphia, but he didn't stay there very long. Then he went to Maryland. He didn't stay there very long either. Then he went to Shenandoah County, Virginia, and it looked like home. He set down roots and lived there the rest of his life, raised a family there. I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't gone there, but I could see what attracted him to Shenandoah County. It looks like home. It's a lovely little town. Nearby there, a few generations back, is where I had another mayor in the family who actually worked in this building. It's now a private office building. But in Europe, it's just wonderful, the old buildings that you can see that you might actually have a connection to. Now, my maiden name is Robertson. And so my sisters and I, of course, we had to go to Scotland. Now, here's what I know. I have traced our family back to a guy named James Robertson, who was in Edinburgh in about 1710. Well, being James Robertson in Edinburgh is like being John Smith in New York City. There are way too many of them, and you can't, and I couldn't trace him back any further than that. But this is Scotland. So in Scotland, as it turns out, areas are associated with clan names. And right there in the middle of the Highlands is the Robertson territory. So although we don't know exactly who from that area we're descended from, we do know the area, and that was good enough for us. We went there. And very often with a clan name, you'll find particular buildings or particular valleys that are associated with clan name. I don't know how this works for other countries, but it certainly works very well for Scotland. Now, if you're planning this trip, there are several ways you can get help with this. You can do this independently, of course, and that's what we did going to Scotland. But there are two kinds of vacations or trips that might be offered commercially for that. There are genealogical vacations, and there are heritage vacations. Genealogical vacations are designed with people specifically that are going to help you look for the places and cemeteries, et cetera, that of your specific ancestors. So they're going to take your family tree and relate it to some places. That's a very specialized market. But there are also heritage vacations, which are just vacations that help you to get the flavor and feel of a country or region. A few years ago, Marty McNew and I went to a trip of Poland, and she had roots there. And I think I was the only person in the entire tour group who did not have Polish roots. I just like the country. But you can find these if you're, no matter where your roots were from, you can look online and find these. These are some other articles that will give you some more tips about planning your genealogical vacation. So what I would recommend is that you do your research and pack your bags and go find your family.